In this episode of the Business of E-commerce, I talk with David Hoffmann about what are the hidden risks importing from China. This is the Business of E-commerce, episode 107. Welcome to the Business of E-commerce, the show that helps e-commerce retailers start, launch, and grow their e-commerce business. I'm your host, Charles Plesky, and I'm here today with David Hoffmann. David is the founder of GlobalTQM. He is an expert in Chinese sourcing, supply chain, private label, and brand licensing. I asked David on the show today to chat about what are some of the hidden risks importing from China. So hey, David, how are you doing today?
Very good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Awesome to have you on the show. I love the topic of some of the risks importing from China. I think it's one of those things a lot of people kind of tell folks just to kind of jump into it, but a lot of people don't talk about the other side of like what you can run into. And there are a lot of potential risks. So
Sure.
First, where are you? So I'm in Boston here, and I know we kind of had to get time zones lined up. Where are you located?
Yeah. So I'm located in Hong Kong. I've been living out here for about 16 years. I've got offices in China, so I spend a lot of my time between Hong Kong and China. So we're about a 12-hour time zone apart.
Okay, and where are you originally from?
Originally from South Africa.
Okay, and you moved there for this specifically, right? To kind of be closer.
Exactly. We were purchasing a whole lot of products from China, and I've got this opportunity to move out to Hong Kong, which at the time seemed like I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And, my plan was to come out here for 1 year, and 16 years later, just got absorbed by this world and this industry, and here I am.
So that was 16 years ago you've been there, and this has been what you do. This has been your focus.
Yeah, so we do a lot of sourcing and quality control in China. I've started different businesses, and those businesses have all started because I've always had this hub and base in China. Being able to source products, deal with manufacturers, and really get the right quality product. And that's always been for our own businesses and my own businesses. And from here, it's just kind of accelerated into helping more and more people on the ground in China. And as such, I haven't been able to leave.
Yeah, I've heard a number of folks that once they start kind of scaling in the sourcing, like let's say there's two partners, there'll be like one partner that stays local, and then one partner goes out there, X number of times per year, and almost like it's their home away from home sort of thing. I feel like it's kind of uncommon. Yeah, is that something you recommend, or are there other ways around that, or? Like, what are some of the best practices when you want to start doing this?
It's a great point. I think why that happens, and it's almost, I think as you get bigger in a business, it becomes a necessity. There are different ways to do it, but I think the core of it to me is really it's about, having the relationship with your suppliers and really being able to, oversee what they do and work closely with them. And I think, what you'll find why a lot of people end up living out here is just because of that. They need to have that proximity to suppliers, oversee the details, because this whole business is a lot of attention to detail, and distance unfortunately creates a barrier for lots of problems to occur. Just by being on the ground, you can manage it closely. You're closer to opportunities as well. As new opportunities arise, you can react quicker and faster. So I think it's like any business, the closer you are to things, the easier they go. And because all the manufacturing is done in China, as you scale up, it does kind of make sense to either be here, have a partner here, or, if you can find reliable companies to outsource to, it's an option. But, one of the things I always say to people, and I work with a lot of companies of different sizes, is nothing replaces your work and your input into these things. So no matter what type of resource you're working with in China, you always ultimately have to own that and take control and really lead the project and project manage your product development.
Yeah, but let's say you're a retailer and you have a family and kids and they go to school and all sorts of things, and you just can't like pick up and move there. Is there something in between? Is there some alternative that you kind of see folks successfully doing? Or is that, do you really need it like a man on the ground sort of thing?
No, I think you do need a man on the ground. You don't necessarily have to be the one on the ground. I think I mean, I don't want to speak specifically about our company, but as an example, we offer services on the ground in China, but, our business model is really such that we help you build the relationship with your supplier. And, we don't believe in, kind of having middlemen in the supply chain process. We believe in, just nurturing those relationships. And, I think having somebody that you can send to the factory to check on things, or even just a Western mindset or a Western voice that you can talk to, communicate with, can check samples quicker and faster for you, it is very helpful. And I think if you can create a really healthy three-way relationship where things are very transparent, absolutely you can outsource a lot of that work. And I think you can make the process such that you can still do your checks and balances, and that if that means more sampling and checking more and more samples and not rushing things and just taking time to do it remotely, it absolutely can work. And you can send people out to the factories to check it. You can inspect your products before they leave the factory. But I think it's about patience and not rushing things and assuming things are going to be done right. Just checking each step along the way.
What do you say to folks that, because I know this happens all the time, where they start talking to a factory and the factory says, yeah, we have someone here that kind of does that. Someone in-house that does that interfacing for you, where they'll send you, samples. They're on WeChat, and they'll send you, photos right there over the phone. And they say, with our factory, you don't need that. What do you say to folks that do that? Is that viable, or is that still not the way to go?
No, I think, firstly, I think it's absolutely okay to communicate and interface with the factories through WeChat, let them make proposals and all of that. And I encourage that because that's part of the relationship, and also how they conduct themselves is a good kind of litmus test for you to see how they're going to, deal with you. But I think I've been burned so many times, and I know so many people that have, and it's not necessarily intentional or deliberate. Mistakes happen. There's misunderstandings. I say without seeing samples, without checking production before it leaves the factory, without getting, depending on the product type, getting the compliance checked independently, that's crucial. You can't rely just on your manufacturer to provide that for you. Ultimately, you have to own that responsibility, because when there are problems, you're the one facing your customers, your reputation, it's your online business, or even just bricks and mortar retail business. So no, I think it's really essential that there's always third-party checks, or you're checking it with a trusted party that and not because you can't trust people, it's because mistakes happen. I think that's really, really critical. Over time, I think as you build a relationship with the manufacturer and you know them well and you've met them a couple of times and you've had a smooth run of shipments and quality, you can ease up and try. It's like any road. I don't think the relationship in China is necessarily different to a relationship anywhere else. It's you build relationships over time, and trust and confidence is something that's earned over time. And that's when you kind of feel more relaxed and you do less, but you still need to do some basic checks always, because even with the best of intentions, mistakes happen, and I just think that's really important.
Yeah, there's always this dream of everything being completely like hands off, and you're just gonna submit an order, it'll land in the US, it'll go to some 3PL, and orders will start coming in, and the magic will happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why when I came to Hong Kong, I thought I'd come for 1 year and move on. 16 years later, for that exact reason.
You're still working on that dream.
Yeah, exactly. Because I realized I actually need to build a whole infrastructure around all these things. It doesn't stop, but you got to own it. Yeah.
So what are some of the hidden things that people aren't? So these are some of the things that people know, like quality issues, things like that. Are there some more hidden things underneath that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a new retailer?
I think some of the things that I'm kind of facing more and more is, of course, quality. But I think what happens a lot of the time is it's the things you don't discuss with the suppliers that sometimes matter the most, because I find people will often press on a price, but without clarifying the specification first. So, they'll press on a price, the supplier might meet the price, and then you realize later that, They took a shortcut, or they reduced the quality of material, or they changed the thickness of materials. It's kind of always the things that you don't think about that are the ones that creep up, to catch you. So, like I always kind of say, like, price isn't the first thing to negotiate. Like, do like a whole round of sampling first, checking, understanding the specs from multiple factories first, and then when you really know what you want and you've seen the samples, that's the time to negotiate on the price, because you could get 10 samples from 10 people and they can be substantially different in what you expect. I think one of the other things I'm finding a lot more is, we're having a lot more conversations with people in terms of protecting their trademarks in China. And that's something I advocate a lot, because if you register your trademark in China first, we've had cases where suppliers have manufactured trademarks that they see doing well overseas, or just, online sellers in China, you register them themselves. And although, like, a lot of people say I don't sell in China, what happens a lot of the time is the Chinese sellers will go and sell it online on Chinese marketplaces or on Amazon China, and it's lawful because they own the trademark for that market. So, I've been telling people a lot more and more to register your trademarks in China just to protect your manufacturing base, irrespective of whether you're selling there. And then, just watching out for those things you don't know and having patience. I'm finding people try, end relationships too quickly because of lack of patience. And I think often it's just that communication and time that it takes to nurture things. And, don't expect a perfect sample on the first round. People always say, the first sample should be perfect, but it's rarely the case, because I just find manufacturers actually are better at mass production than they are at making handmade samples. And a lot of the time, if it's very custom, they're making handmade samples that aren't perfect. So I think, understanding those kind of nuances and adapting with that patience, are some of the hidden things to kind of look out for and just think about.
Yeah, I like that concept of registering in China. So even if you're not selling in China, you'd recommend registering a trademark there.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
That's one of those little tips. Is there a large cost to doing that, or is that something similar to the US, or what's kind of the process like?
It's a couple of, I mean, there's lots of companies that do it. We even do it for people if they want us to help them with that. It's a couple of $100, I think $200-300, depending on how many classes. But it's one of those things where I've had online sellers where the factories register the trademark and sell it in China. And, it's quite disturbing because you can't really do anything about it. And I just say it's like when you register a business, you take out insurance, there's certain things you do. I just always say register your trademark in China because, like, there's a misconception that intellectual property is not manageable in China. It actually is if you got the Chinese intellectual property. The conflict really comes in when people have got the overseas IP and they try and enforce it in China. It becomes a much more costly, long exercise. And, I say for $200-300, a lawyer is going to charge you $5,000 to $10,000 to deal with the issue. So it's like, for me, it's like negligible. If you've got a good brand that you're building, you're doing well with it, just register it in China. Even if you've got international trademarks, it's just going to shortcut a lot of issues in the long run. And it's becoming more and more of an issue with the marketplaces going global.
Yeah, that's a good one. And you don't hear people saying it that often. It sounds like if you have someone that can help you do it, it's a relatively cheap and easy process, right?
Exactly. And I think that, the obstacles are, you do have to check there are Chinese regulations that determine if your trademark qualifies for registration in China. And you do have to do some of the application in Chinese. But, it's not hard. I mean, we do it for people. It takes them within 7 days, they got the application in. And, then it can take anywhere for a year to get the registration through. But the key is once the application is in, you're already protected because in China, it's the first one to register or to apply. So, at least no one else can come in later without being contested. So I'm just a huge advocate. Anybody I'm dealing with, I'm saying, please do it. Whether it's with us or someone else, just get it done. It's really important.
Okay, that's a good tip right there. So if you're listening, that sounds like one of those things you almost just have to do at that point. It's well worth the small investment. And it sounds like not.
You have to do it, and you
Yeah.
got to hope you never even need to use it. But
Yep.
it's just, if you do have to use it, it would have been a no-brainer. And I think the way the world's changing now, like people always say to me, "Oh, what's the best way to protect my IP in China and stop factories from copying my products?" And I go, you know what? That's a lot harder than enriching your trademark. And your trademark's like your brand. You know, it's your reputation. It's everything you stand for. It's your customer service. So, like, would you protect your personal name, right? It's your integrity. So I say, like, the best way to protect yourself from Chinese manufacturers or copying is protect your trademark and brand name first, because, you know, products have cycles that come and go, and, you know, the next fad comes, and, you know, that's a much harder battle to fight. But, you know, a reputation is something that, you know, nobody can copy easily. And that's your brand. So I say it's the single biggest way to simplify things.
Gotcha. Yeah, good tip there. So
Yeah.
kind of changing gears a little, you mentioned about the sampling process. I feel like there's some confusion around that, where I hear a lot of times someone new kind of doing this, the factory's asking them for cash up front before the sample, during the like this down payment, like all these different things. What's like the right path? Like, what's the best practices? How should this work? And what should someone expect going into this?
So I don't think there's a golden rule from every single supplier that they should follow. I think it comes down to anything. If you can imagine, if you put yourself in, like a lot of people, I said, put yourself in the supplier's shoes. They've probably got hundreds, if not thousands of people approaching them all day, every day for samples. You know, so when a supplier kind of asks me to pay for a sample, I actually always say no problem, because that's how they're going to give me the attention. You know, it shows that I'm serious, right? I'm putting skin in the game. If the guys are asking for samples for free and don't want to pay or want to pay later, you know, what would you do if you had 100 or 200 or 300 people asking you for things? You go to the guy who's serious and says, well, I'm willing to pay for the sample. I think, you know, over time, when you're dealing with them more and more, they start giving you samples for free because you're a customer, you're already buying. So I think, you know, up front, you've got to give a little bit of give and take, pay for the sample, get it. You know, I think it's reasonable that if the sample's no good or it's broken or damaged, that they replace it or substitute it. But, you know, I generally say the one thing you don't want to shortcut is sampling. I don't think you can touch a product without sampling it multiple times. I think if you get a bad sample, it's par for the course. It's kind of an investment in I think the cost of a sample is far less than the pain of ordering the wrong product and not checking it out properly. And I just see sampling as like an investment in product development and R&D and just, you know, quality control. You just have to do it. A lot of manufacturers, by the way, will say, if you place an order, we'll refund you the sample cost. And they will. But I think just mentally, you know, I just see sampling as a necessary evil. I shouldn't say evil, a necessary requirement. And it's a cost of doing business, and it's a much cheaper cost of doing business. What is helpful is that we get all our samples sent to our China office, and our clients also use our China office, because that saves a lot of time and courier costs. So like we say to people, you know, get your sample sent to our office. Our team go through it and check them and do like a Skype call with you, hold them up and discuss them, because, you know, it takes a factory 1 or 2 days to send them to a local China office, and, you know, and they'll often cover the freight cost, you know, because it's quite cheap. So very often the factories will cover that cost, and you pay for the sample, and then you don't have to worry about couriering it overseas. You know, and then you kind of get people like us to go through it with you, check them, and, you know, once you've kind of done that filtering, you say, okay, if that one's good and that one's good, send it. If those aren't good, just send them back to the factory and try to get a refund, you know. Or in some cases, a factory, like if you've got a local office to send the samples to, in some cases a factory will, some cases you'll get away with the factory giving you the sample, because you can always say, well, if you send it to my China office, if it's no good, I'm going to send it back. If it's good, you know, I'll pay for it within a couple of days. And, you know, it's like a 50-50 chance. Some will accept it, some won't accept it. So, you know, I find that like whole sampling process we do for our customers is like incredibly helpful, and it saves so much time. because, you get samples that are not good. If you ship them overseas, that can take a couple of days, if not weeks. And then, that it's no good. You start the process again and you've incurred that cost. So I like to check samples in China on round 1, round 2, and then when you've narrowed it down, you get the right one sent through to you. I think it speeds up the whole cycle time, and I think overall it pays for itself because you've saved all that courier and all that time you've saved. So that's generally how I approach that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the biggest things with the sample time, with the sample
Yeah.
process, where folks are, when they're getting into it, they kind of just want it to happen and don't realize the amount of back and forth and time it's going to take is a lot longer than I think a lot of people's expectations.
It's long, and it's important. It's the details, right? Like I always say to people, like, don't expect a perfect sample, because that's what you're doing, right? You're building a brand. You're that buffer between what the end consumer sees and all the hard work that goes on in the manufacturing process, right? You want to see every detail. You want to see the finish, the quality, the texture, the feel, the performance. You need to see that. That is what your job is, and to expect it to be perfect it's not realistic. Rather embrace the process and go, well, I'm glad I found all these problems because I didn't produce it like that.
That's one of the points right there. That kind of little thing you said to point out, that's what your job is. I think a lot of people think that's the factory's job, or that's someone else's job, and they don't realize that your value as the retailer, part of it is that quality control. So the factory, that's where the line ends, is the factory produces a product, but quality control is the retailer's job. And I think that
Exactly.
kind of gets blurry.
And who does a customer, the consumer, come back to? The retailer. If they come back to you, you're going to face them, you're going to refund them, you're going to credit them. They're not going to say, who did you buy it from and how did this happen?
No one asks that as a consumer when you get a bad review on Amazon. They don't ask that.
Exactly. Exactly. And the factories never say, well, you credit your customer, we'll credit you, don't worry. It's very rare.
Yes. So I think the sample process, that is the biggest thing. People just kind of rush through that and just want to. They think somehow it's not quite right. Like maybe they get the first sample, but it's not quite right, and they kind of just say okay because they want it to be done, but don't realize there's gonna be some back and forth. Like how many times? What is kind of a short sample process versus a longer one? Like are there ever times if somebody gets one, they're perfect, let's go, let's do it? Or should you expect 4 or 5 back and forth?
It's such a good question. I think if you've gone back 4 or 5 times, it's perfectly normal and acceptable. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes we even break it down. It could be generally okay, and we might say, "Oh, I'm looking at your headphone. Maybe the cable on the cable's the wrong color." You know what? Just send me the cable. I want to see the cable. So then you say, "Okay, just send me that part. Send me that piece," and then you say, "Okay, fine. I'm happy with all these parts I've seen." Now, you build that into a spec and then say to the factory, please confirm you're going to produce with these parts, and we're going to inspect it, that the mass production, has got all these different parts we've approved and signed off and are happy with. That's what we want to see in mass production. And that's why you have to have somebody there checking that mass production for you, who understands the process and has been through it with you, because those details are hard to pick up unless you've been through that journey.
And who understands what you're looking for very specifically.
Exactly.
Because, let's say it's a clothing product, the feel of the fabric, like the texture, that sort of thing. There's some very subtle differences there that you can't get unless you're physically, holding it in your hand, touching it, seeing the way it looks in the light. Like there's all these little kind of nuances that unless you have someone on the ground that realizes, hey, I want I want it to look a certain way in the light versus not in the light. I want it to feel smooth, not rough, or whatever that is.
100%. And even that's like a process. It's like working with the team, right? It's like, at the beginning, you got to handhold and nurture that team so much more until it gets to a point where you go, remember how you've shown them, feel this fabric. That's a texture I always want. And then they know, and they can visit half a dozen factories for you going forward and say, that's good, that's not good. And they've got like a benchmark or, frame of reference that they can compare to. And slowly you're building your team of people that understand what you like and what you need and what you want.
Yeah, I like that. What are the gotchas you see new retailers running into that they, start this process and they completely don't see? And I know like the sampling is one of the big ones. But are there any other ones that retailers they don't even know what they don't know, sort of thing?
Yeah, look, there's a list. Delivery dates. I think like they just demand a delivery date, and they don't. Packaging. Packaging, I think, is a huge one. Packaging and labeling. I think the attention to detail on that's so critical. And I see guys take so much time on it, but then they demand a delivery. That they forget that there's a production schedule. So like I always say, like, as far as I'm concerned, until you've actually signed off all your artwork and packaging, don't even expect a delivery date, because it's just common sense. The supplier can't order those materials, right? So if they can't order those materials, how are they going to finish production? So like I always hear people say, oh, well, I've signed it off now. Can you quickly rush production and get it done next week? It just doesn't make sense. Right? Well, he's got to order those materials, get them in, then start production. So I think that people misunderstand the timelines. And overestimate what a factory can pull off in a short space of time without making a mistake or compromising some quality somewhere. And it's not just quality in the product; it could be quality in the workmanship. Time stresses make people make mistakes, order wrong materials, put the wrong artwork through. I mean, we've had it loads of times where we inspect the goods and we go, but you're using a packaging that the version 1, not version 2, and they go, oh, we made a mistake, we were under pressure, we sent the wrong one to the printer. So there's a lot of other quality issues that come out of time stresses. So I think, really planning those things and doing them properly makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I like that idea of understanding that delivery date, so you can't even get that date until the contract's signed. Like, don't even expect the factory to try, like, don't even press them on the date, because right, they don't know.
Estimated date, right? It's like if everything runs according to clockwork, that's going to be your production date, and people just use that kind of as their Bible, right? That's their yardstick, which is important, especially running promotions. But if it's a first time factory and everything's new, you haven't checked a sample before, or you haven't done compliance checks on the product before, you haven't done packaging and artwork and anything like that, it's just not realistic. You have to budget that time in. If it's a repeat order, I think it's a lot different. Then you can say, okay, look, it's the exact same repeat order production run, nothing's changing, or there's some minor changes. But yeah, and I think you've got to budget that extra. And everybody says, don't worry, I'll get the artwork done in 5 days. It's never 5 days. Because it's human nature. You see packaging, you see the design, and then you go, oh, this is better, that's better, change this, change that. And that's fine. You want it to be right, but you understand it pushes out the production schedules.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize is they see an estimated date and they think that's from like today. But what really happens is that's from when the factory gets everything they need. And then it's still only an estimate at that point. But so don't even like you don't want to base everything on that. It's just an estimate. It might be the first time they're producing with this material or in this method. So they
100%.
Right. So and you don't want to be pushing them that hard on that date, because they might hit the date, but make the product,
Exactly. And I think it's okay to keep them under pressure, but like I'll say you can't fool yourself, right? It's okay to keep them under pressure, but you have to understand that I'm probably not going to get this in 45 days. It's probably going to be 60 days it's going to ship. And as long as you got your own internal time frame, it's okay, keep pressure on the 40 days, the 30 days, whatever's been committed. And when things go wrong, apply a bit of pressure. That doesn't hurt any. Targets and milestones never hurt anybody, right, in getting things done, especially the factories. But I think don't trick yourself into believing it. You must have your own internal time frame, and then you just, you push production as fast as you can, realistically.
Yeah, you're going to have to add buffers, right? Because even if it's not the factory, there could be shipping issues. There could be issues with customs that, who knows? It just like you hear all the time, products just getting held up at customs, and they're in some customs black hole for indeterminate. And you can't even get a date from customs. Will never give
exactly.
They do what they want when they want.
People don't understand that, but it's true. You can't. They just get stuck in limbo.
Yep. So just add buffers, basically.
Yeah, you're right. And I think also people don't realize, the factory wants to ship the goods, And, it's in their interest to produce the goods and ship the goods and get them out. They don't want to give you a hard time. So when these things do happen, I think you do need to, understand them and work with the suppliers to work through them. It actually builds a healthier relationship.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. So
yeah.
Last question, although it's a big one, but in the interest of time, I want to make sure we get this in, is when do you start when and how do you negotiate on pricing with the factory? Because like you were saying earlier, I see people do that way too soon in the process
Way too soon.
Yeah, they're basically asking for a sample and a price day one. And
exactly.
The factory doesn't even know what they're giving you a price on at that point.
And you haven't even seen a sample. How can you say that's too expensive, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You see, I always negotiate from information is king. That's how I look at it, right? Information and knowledge is king. So, I say you use the factories to educate yourself on the materials. You're speaking to a couple of factories, right? So if you're getting different prices, it's okay to say to a factory, why would somebody else quote me a lower price than this? It looks the same. They'll be the first ones to tell you, oh, but is it this material? Is it the spec? Is it this thickness? Is it, this finish, right? And that will help you educate. That gives you the knowledge you need, right? Gives you the ammunition you need down the line. So, I just kind of record and collect the information like it. And then I think I start negotiating once I've got a whole bunch of samples and I've seen what I'm getting for the prices quoted and I know what's going to work for me more or less, and I say what works for me in terms of what I'm going to land it at, what can I sell it at? And, I don't want to be stupid about a price and go to them and ask them for something I know is not achievable and kill the deal. So once I've got that knowledge, I'll always negotiate from a position of strength and knowledge. I want to go in and say, guys, I've checked 5 products. They're 100% identical. The specs are the same. I need $1 off this or $2 off this, right? That's when it's the time to negotiate because you got to be able to back up what you're saying because the guys that know what they're doing will see straight through you. They'll go, no, you don't. There's no way you got the same product as me, at that price. So you got to know those details. Then you can negotiate. And then, and you can also then find ways to cut down the price. Like, guys, what can you do to lower the price, right? We need to be at this price point. What's not going to compromise the quality? Rather agree on different packaging or different, if a different material where they say, look, it's a different material, but we think the performance is the same and you can make the educated choice. So I think understanding the materials, the costs of those materials and having different products to benchmark, then you start to negotiate.
Yeah, I like that about you're almost working with the factory to try to get to a target cost in some of these, right?
Exactly.
Where it's not just give me the cheapest price. It's not just like you're beating them up for the cheapest price. You're more saying, we're trying to get to, 23.36 for this unit. And right now they're coming in a bit higher. How can we get there? Yeah, because I've heard people do that with packaging and things like that, where maybe instead of having the factory package it, you can actually just have them come in bulk to the US and then break them apart here or different things.
100%. And I must tell you, a lot of people don't realize what a big cost difference a packaging makes. I know firsthand, we deal directly with a lot of printers in China. And I know if I do a production run of 1,000 or 5,000 boxes on a product, my price is so significantly higher than when we do a production run on 50,000 units. Even I was surprised. I was like blown away. I said, wow, how can it be that much of a difference? And it really is. So, quantity makes a huge difference. So, if it's smaller quantities, rather make compromises on packaging where, you can lower the cost. If it's important, it depends on the product and how important the packaging is. If it's eCommerce, packaging sometimes less important as long as it passes drop tests, but visually, the product's purchased in theory before it arrives at the door. But, it's a balancing act, but I do think packaging is one area that costs can really be saved a lot, and then just also understanding specs and materials and products.
Yeah, I've heard people that kind of skip on the packaging and then have this like 50% damage rate and UPS is pushing back, but they're saying, these weren't packaged correctly. So then you're fighting with
drop tests and vibration tests on everything before they go.
Oh yeah? How do you do that exactly?
Yeah, so firstly, when we're dealing with our suppliers, we give them our specification. We tell them, I think we use one STA. I stand for correction. I'll give you the right details for notes later. But I think we use one STA, which is like an international drop shipping test standard. So they'll make the packaging according to that. And then we actually send our people into the factory, our inspectors, they do drop tests at production and inspection. They'll take X number of units, we'll do drop tests on them. They drop them 5 sides from 1 meter high on 6 corners, and then you open it up, the product shouldn't be damaged, the box should have minimal damage. So there's a standard, there's actually a quality control standard for drop tests, and we do it on every single product. But we tell the factory up front before we place the order, because it's not fair to place an order in the factory, then go impose that inspection standard, and they go, but you never even asked us for that, because there is a cost difference. But I'm sure you've experienced it. There's no cost worse than reworking product and having damaged goods in the warehouse after they've shipped. That's the worst case scenario.
And it's the damaged goods, and then you have to send a second one and then you have to go to UPS and try to negotiate your insurance claim, and and maybe you get it, maybe you don't. There's a whole. It just opens up this long list of bad things that happen.
And suddenly that 20 cents extra for the packaging didn't seem like such a big deal.
Yeah. So do factories know, like people that have had this happen, right? Does a factory know what's going to work for the drop test and what won't? And it's just something that the retailer just didn't ask them or didn't kind of specify, or was the factory trying to skimp on it? Like, what usually happens when this kind of breaks down?
I find there's a mixture of factories. Some factories will know straight away, and they go, oh, okay, if you want that, we have to use better packaging. And then some just know straight away, which I like because it's reassuring. At least they know. Some just go, oh, okay, well, we'll try and we'll check and we'll test, and they don't know. And I think, trying to suck the truthful answer out of them is an important part. But, I think as long as they agree to it when you're placing the order before you're paying your deposit or opening your letter of credit, I think as long as you agree on that in your spec, I always say you front load everything. I front load all my quality control checks. I front load all my specs and requirements, all the checks we're going to do on it, all the compliance documents. I front load it all because I would much rather they tell me at that point, oh, look, we can't do this or we can't do that, or we don't know how to do this. Because if they don't know how to do it, I can often help them get it done. And okay, well, look, guys, we'll help you do it, but, maybe it's going to cost some money. And we discuss that. But just front loading things and knowing up front is the key to everything for me.
Awesome. Well, that's super helpful. I
hope so.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. If folks want to learn more about you, kind of ask you some questions, kind of contact you about the company, where's the best way to do that?
So we've got a website called GlobalTQM.com. It's one word, GlobalTQM.com. And then, on there's actually a button where you can just schedule a free call. And if anybody wants to just schedule a free call and they can mention your show in the notes when they book the call, and then I'll take all those calls personally. I love talking to the customers, and then we can talk them through. Just free advice is fine, and seeing where and how we can help them, we're more than happy to as well.
If you're offering free advice, I definitely urge people to take that, because it sounds like this is one of those things where just having this knowledge of what not to do even is so super important. So people should definitely take you up on that.
I agree. It's what you don't know that bites you.
Yeah, exactly. So awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. Definitely appreciate that.
Wonderful. And thanks for having me.